Welcome back to Tokyo Forum. Now it's time for parallel panel discussions, meaning two sessions will take place simultaneously on two channels. First, let me welcome the organizers. Emma Arisa, Associate Professor in the Institute for Future Initiatives at the University of Tokyo, and Takao Hensh, Professor of Molecular and Cellular Biology and also Professor of Neurology at Harvard University. Welcome to you both, and thank you for organizing these very important events today. Now, Professor Emma, if I may start with you, could you give us a brief overview of what we can expect from your session?
Thank you, Ms. Yamamoto. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So my name is Arisa Emma, an associate professor at the University of Tokyo, moderating the session called Toward Building Trustworthy AI and Society with Mutual Respect. So there are a great variety of issues surrounding AI and society. There exists inequality caused by data and algorithm bias, social anxiety about changes in work styles and employment, and the impact on the global environment and resources due to the massive consumption of electricity, and the confusion caused by hybrid warfare, such as using drug use technology and fake news. And these issues cannot be captured within the existing framework. As technology systems and people's value interact, we need to weave answers to the question, what kind of society do we want to live in? Through dialogue with diverse people. So in discussing these topics today, we have invited world leaders who are currently engaged in diverse activities from an international and also interdisciplinary perspectives. So we wanted to, I hope you enjoy the session today with us. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. And how about you, Professor Hensh? What would you like us to think about as we listen?
Yes, good morning and good evening. Good day to all of you as well. As we have all experienced during the past 2 years of this pandemic, we realize that resilience is essential for mental health. Humans originally evolved in harmony with nature only to create complex cities, societies, and technologies that now ironically isolate us in many ways. And while authentic relationships between people and the natural environment can be protective to our brain, social stress and man-made disasters threaten our mental health in this modern world. And so our session addresses how we can build a resilient mind and maintain it across the lifespan. Our session welcomes prominent speakers from North America, Europe, and Japan, and takes a multidisciplinary perspective from neuroscience, psychology, psychiatry, preventive medicine, and social science. And our main focus will be on brain development and plasticity to promote resilience in the healthy balance with our dramatically changing ecosystem. We look forward to seeing you at session 1B.
All right, great. And here's a question for your session. How far have we come to fully understand the relationship between the mind, human spirit, and the physical body? This is a question we received from one of our audiences. So let's look forward to getting some hints to this question in your session. Now, before we start to our audience, I'd like you to make sure to check the buttons where you can switch channels. It's on the left-hand side of your screen on the blue bar. Please click channel A or B. You can also select a language between English and simultaneous interpretation in Japanese. All right? So, are you ready? Let's begin.
So I think the session started. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Hi again. My name is Arisa Emma. I'm moderating this session called Toward Building Trustworthy AI and Society with Mutual Respect. So humanity is now facing planetary scale challenges such as the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and community fragmentation, and also the concerns to the future work. So the impact of artificial intelligence and other cutting-edge technologies has been pointed out as a response to these challenges. In this session, we will invite world leaders in the field to discuss not only the principles that we need to pay attention to when using AI in society, but also how to put them into practice, keeping in mind not only the challenges that AI brings, but also the challenges that can be overcome using AI. So I'm really happy to invite this brilliant panelists to here. And I wanted to so the time concerned, we only have like 45 minutes. I think I wanted to pose 3 questions. And so the first one, I would like each speakers to briefly introduce themselves and talk about what they consider to be the key issues surrounding artificial intelligence. So maybe we could start with Dr. Rebecca Finley. So Rebecca, could you start from you?
Good morning and good evening. Let me begin by thanking you so much for inviting me to be part of the Tokyo Forum today. It's a deep honor to participate in this prestigious symposium. And I think the question that you've posed as technologies, systems, and people's values interact, we need to answer this question: what kind of society do we want to live in? And that is really the driving question around the partnership on AI to benefit people and society, where I've just been appointed CEO. It was very much founded on the belief that multi-stakeholder international community building is critical to ensuring that AI benefits people and society. And today it is an international partnership of about 100 academic, civil society, industry, and media organizations that are coming together to pool our collective wisdom so that we can focus on AI that advances positive outcomes for people and society, really in answering that question that you put before us: how do we create a society that benefits all people? And so when I think about my role as I take on this new role at the PAI, there are 3 issues that are top of mind for me. One of them is clearly part of what our panel will be discussing, which is how do we move now as a global AI community from principles into practice? There has been much work done, very important work done on building frameworks for principles. And now the question is, how do we ensure that that is done across all sectors and that we have strong accountability measures in place to track it? Secondly, is really this question around how we do that. What is the role of multi-stakeholder organizations and how we do it? And is it possible to do it on an international basis? And so when we think about social change and collective action, how do we bring sectors together, making sure we have strong sectors individually, but also strong collaboration across sectors? So I'm looking forward to exploring some of those issues today with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's really exciting to hear what the partnership with AI is doing right now. So maybe next, can I ask Professor Alice O?
Yes, thank you, Arisa Emma. I'm very honored and happy to be here today. I'm a professor at KAIST in the School of Computing in Korea. There are many important issues surrounding AI, and we're going to be talking about some of these today during the entire session. I'm just going to bring up a few to begin with. So first of all, I'm concerned about people, including myself, who are very anxious and uneasy because we don't have faith in this very, very rapid progress in AI, whether this progress is going to harm us in some way or will benefit us, right? So, and secondly, I'm concerned about the divide. So there's a big divide between the developed countries and the developing countries. And even within each country, there's a very increasing gap between the young, the healthy, well-educated, rich people and the poor, the weak, the minority groups. And this divide is already there. We've seen it, I mean, for thousands of years, but it's going to be even more serious because of this rapid and uneven development of AI, which is exacerbating this, increasing this gap. And lastly, I'm going to turn a little bit more positive. And this is because recently I've met so many people like the panelists here today, and I've worked on various projects which are working on the positive side of AI, right? So how are we going to develop AI toward the social good, the solving the important problems that we're facing as a society, right? That includes climate change, that includes education, the pandemic, et cetera. So I think we'll be talking about this all throughout the session today, and I'm looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. And we'll definitely discuss about that topic. So next, Professor Uday Desai, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much. I am indeed honored to be on this particular panel. And it's in fact my pleasure to be part of the Tokyo Forum. I do share the views that have been expressed by my colleagues on the panel out here. I would start with a positive note. I think AI is going to play a very positive role in our society. It can do a lot for us, particularly if you look at healthcare. I think in time to come, AI will be extremely important and extremely help us. And in fact, one positive thing which has happened, if you really look at the way the vaccines have been developed in the current pandemic, okay, AI has played a role in expediting. In history of vaccines, we have never developed vaccines so fast. Besides the biochemistry and the biotechnology which was there, AI also has played a very big role. So already we can see certain benefits that are going to accrue from use of AI in overall society. Yes, there are a lot of concerns out here also, and I will share my thoughts as we go along as to how some of these concerns can be handled. Things are not very clear, okay, in terms of employment, in terms of displacing jobs, in terms of how humans and machines broadly are going to interact with one another, how things will move forward. So those, I guess, will come up in the questions that you will ask us and the discussion that we'll have in the panel out here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Uday. And last but not least, I would like to ask Professor Amy van Weinsberg for your opinion.
Yes, thank you. Nice to be here, Arisa, Emma. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I echo what the other panelists have said, that it's an honor to participate in this panel at the Tokyo Forum. So my name is Amy van Weinsberg. I am the Alexander von Humboldt Professor for the Applied Ethics of Artificial Intelligence. I'm here at the University of Bonn in Germany. I'm also director of the Institute for Science and Ethics, which is here at the University of Bonn as well. I was a member of the European Commission high-level expert group on AI. We started back in 2018, where we created the guidelines for trustworthy AI. So I'm also very interested, as Rebecca mentioned, this now new phase that we're in, where it's not about creating or developing principles, but it's about how we translate those principles into practice. And I'm curious to see what's happening at the European level with this document that we created a few years ago. I would say for me, I am in the ethics space, but I began in the robotics space. So I began as part of a technical team in robotics, and then I moved over into ethics. So my position, my take on applied ethics is really, how can we take the abstract concepts and ideas that we have in the field of ethics and translate those into something that's useful and usable for the technical disciplines, for the natural sciences, for the computer scientists, the computer engineers. So my whole role in my academic career is really, how can we look at ethics as a resource? And I think that's really important, because oftentimes ethics is seen as an afterthought. We create a technology and then what are the problems to think about? And instead, I'm trying to encourage the sort of looking at ethics at an earlier stage in the design process of artificial intelligence. I've been in the space of AI ethics for over a decade now. And what I'm doing currently in my current role is to look at a new value, well, not a new value, but a value that has been less represented in the AI ethics space, which is sustainability, in particular, the environmental consequences of AI. So here at Bonn, just last week, I launched the Bonn Sustainable AI Lab, where I'm bringing together multidisciplinary researchers to look at these important questions. How do we measure the environmental impact? How broad do we look at when we're talking about environmental impact? Carbon emissions, water usage, land usage, and so on. I think it's really important to sort of reframe the conversation in this way to when we start by looking at the environmental consequences, this forces us to recognize that there are demographics that are bearing the burden, the costs of this kind of consumption and production of artificial intelligence. And these demographics are often ones that are not at the table to have these conversations. So I think that, by starting with environmental consequences as our ground zero, as our first question to pay attention to, it really pushes us towards a new kind of inclusion in the AI ethics space. I stop there.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you all for keeping in time. So I would like to make this session more interactive. So please feel free to raise your hands and just jump into the discussion starting from now on. So as a second question, I would like to discuss more deeper what you already has been discussed. So various perspectives has been identified, both positive and negative side of artificial intelligence. And we all know that the collaboration between academia, industry, government, and the private sector is essential to solve these problems and make the AI ethics principles into practices. For example, my center at the University of Tokyo is also conducting research on AI governance, and we are actually collaborating with various stakeholders and making policy recommendation. One of the things what we wanted to do is to create the frameworks that we all can, discuss together. So how to identify risk and maybe not, make these principles like the transparency, fairness, accountability things into practices. So those kind of frameworks, toolkits, or the other kind of devices or the technology is actually really needed from the real world. So as the next question, I would like to talk about or ask about the project that each of you is currently working on in more detail. So, and in addition, I would like you to talk about what kind of society we should create, including expectations on impacts on future generations as well. So maybe this time I would like to start from Amy. You said you've launched the Sustainable AI Laboratory, and the sustainability is definitely an important value that we all have to discuss. So could you start from what you are doing and what's your project is aiming for?
Sure. So I can also say something about this idea of creating frameworks and toolkits. And I think it sounds like an easy thing to do, right? Well, we create a framework so that we can measure, impacts and at what moment we have to worry about accountability, but it's really very complicated. It's very difficult, especially coming from the academic space. When I work in the not-for-profit and civil society organizations, and I've worked with industry on a few projects, and I think it's really important to have this kind of interaction between academic or civil society and industry so that we see just how different the processes are, so that the academics understand the kind of obstacles that industry is up against. So that would be just the first thing that I would say there. And I imagine that, Rebecca and Alice have a lot more to say about the projects that they're involved in, where they're really getting into moving from principles to practice. But in terms of the project that I'm working on right now, so what I'm trying to do is to raise awareness of this value of sustainability. So, you had asked earlier, what are the principles that we want to be focusing on? And then how do we put them into practice? So really, my research now is about shedding light on this principle that's received very little attention, which is sustainability, little attention in the AI ethics space. and then to look at what it means to put that in practice. So we've just partnered with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, who runs the COP conference. And we will be working with them to try and identify how broad do we go with this idea of sustainability. I have environmental ethics researchers, I have care ethics researchers, I have political scientists who are all working on the team. We're looking at how do we make sense of this principle of sustainability, right? So in the same way that the concept or the principle of privacy has changed over the years as we're exposed to new kinds of technology. In the medical space, in the healthcare space, privacy used to be about, do you have your robe on, right? Or is the curtain enclosed around the patient's bed? Now, when we think about privacy in healthcare, it's really your data. Who has control and access to your data? So I'm trying to, with my group, track what sustainability does mean in the AI ethics space and what it should mean. Is it about maintaining our status quo right now? Maintaining our carbon emissions, maintaining electronic waste where we're at now? Or is it about repair and restoring and that kind of thing? So there's a conceptual element, but then there's also the technical element. How do we measure carbon emissions? And of course, there are different tools out there. How do we encourage the academics to begin this measurement? How do we encourage industry? Is it something that we can leave companies to kind of self-regulate? Or do we actually need policy-making tools for this? And once we have done measurements and we understand the training over different lengths of time or using different GPUs and whatnot, once we understand the differences, then we need to look at creating perhaps a cap, right? A carbon cap. You can only train for a certain length of time. You can't exceed certain carbon emissions. So my work right now is really about understanding this value, putting it on the stage. Let's pay attention to this, understanding what this means, and then looking at how we measure and how we interact with the policymakers to really acknowledge the fact that we are in a climate crisis right now.
Thank you, Amy. That sounds really fascinating and involving a lot of stakeholders. And I think that the sustainable AI would be definitely the next year's hot issues. And I guess the role of the industry is also becoming really important. And Rebecca, you are the active executive director of the Partnership on AI. And I guess you've been working on various projects. So maybe you could talk about the kind of overview or maybe the hot issues that's been going on in the Partnership on AI.
Happy to do so. And I wanted to pick up on that question or that concept, Amy, that you introduced around how does research community work with industry, work with government and policymakers, and how do we drive some of that work forward together while holding each accountable in terms of the work that is happening. And I like to think about some of the work that we're doing at PAI through around the lens of documentation, which seems like such a simple and straightforward concept, and it is, of course, much more complicated than it seems. But when we think about the principles of transparency, responsibility, accountability, these are all critical and core to the frameworks that we've been thinking about, the principles around the way in which AI should be deployed. It is, as we've talked about, really, really difficult to fully operationalize those concepts. And so thinking about documentation as a way to, in the first instance, understand better the genesis, elements, and makeup of the data systems which are being deployed and used throughout the life cycle of a machine learning system, as well as to understand better the models that are being developed and deployed, and then again, the practices and policies that are in place as well. And is documentation a way to start to begin to identify what some of those challenges and then lead to the potential to do measurement and auditing and assessment moving forward. And so the nice thing about this work that's happening at PAI is it's a great great example of where there were researchers who really catalyzed the field in the very, very, very beginning. So we have the early work on data sheets for data sets, model cards for model reporting, fact sheets. This was really very, very early work looking at how to bring together documentation with systems. And so we were very fortunate back in the very early days of PAI that leading thinkers on this like Hannah Wallach and Jen Wortman-Vaughan and Timnit Gebru and Meg Mitchell came together with some of our other partners in IBM, Francesca Rossi and Kush Varney and Eric Horvitz. It was just a really extraordinary community who came together to begin to catalyze this work. And now what we've been able to do with some of those early initiatives is work very broadly with our community to pull together a full reference library that synthesizes across different approaches to documentation and really sort of offers up step-by-step approaches to try to think about ways in which, in particular, industry can now deploy documentation in practice and really bridge that gap. And so in addition to sort of creating materials, toolkits, step-by-step guides, glossaries, working with diverse voices initiatives to really bring in ways of better understanding and articulating the work that we're doing. We're now moving into an iterate pilot model, right, where we can sort of create a lab where we're testing out ideas, developing new use cases, and then sharing those up with the broader community to try to, over time, iterate and involve how do we actually take this work into practice. So it's an area I'm particularly excited about because I like how real world it is in thinking about some of these challenges. And I think we'll have a lot of learnings in the year to come to share out with the broader community about how we can do this work effectively.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Yeah, I think we all are benefited from what you're doing from the partnership AI work and the documentation, the references that exactly needed, so that we don't have to start from the scratch. So everyone has their own. Those we can use those knowledges, and when we have the access, I think we could start to think about what the better world would be from that basis. And so I also would like to move on to Alice. So you are also you're being chairing the global community called the Global Partnership on AI, and you're chairing the pandemic session. And I think lots of things has been done from that project. So could you tell us what's going on there?
Yeah, sure. So it was, first of all, fascinating to hear Rebecca's, what she had to say about model cards and data sheets. I love that work. It's very inspirational. And GPAI, which has a very, very similar name to Partnership on AI, it's a global group of experts from academia, experts from industry, civil organizations, and also include some policymakers as well. And the key to GPAI, or the two key aspects of GPAI, is collaboration among the different types of experts and the collaboration across different countries around the world. So GPAI was started out with 15 countries, and now we have more than 20 countries participating. And the purpose or the goal of GPAI is to drive toward, better use, development of AI, and how AI can be used to benefit the society. So responsible AI is one of the working groups within GPAI, and the pandemic group is a subgroup within responsible AI. And as the name suggests, the pandemic group is working on ways to better solve this current pandemic and also prepare for, perhaps some future pandemics, because that's what the experts are predicting. So there are two projects that we did within the pandemic working group. One is to make a repository of AI-based solutions to the pandemics. And this goes from the very basic science about pandemics. So, the biology, the proteins about the virus, all the way to educating the public about the vaccine, misinformation and trust and all those kinds of issues. And the second project that we worked on is about drug discovery for public health. And in the interest of time, let me just elaborate on the second project. So the entire process of drug discovery is very costly, both in terms of time and money. And the private sector is, of course, driven by financial gain. So there are diseases and public health problems for which the private sector isn't working on the drug discovery as much as they should in the interest of public health. So one example is antibiotics, right? So because antibiotics are, going to play a very, very important role in the next decade or so, governments and experts in healthcare know that that's something that everybody should focus a lot of their energy on. But because it's not financially lucrative, the pharmaceutical companies aren't doing as much as they should, even though they are doing a little bit. So how do we get the governments to intervene, perhaps, or encourage more research and development of antibiotics? And what does AI have to do with all of this, right? AI can speed up the process, and AI can bring down the cost. So, if you think about protein synthesis, for example, predicting what the protein structure is going to be, sort of what, very similar to what DeepMind is doing with their AlphaFold, that is driven mostly by AI and machine learning, and all the way to clinical trials, where we can try to speed up the entire clinical trial, which takes years and costs billions of dollars. If we can speed up that process somehow, also using AI, then we can just shorten the entire drug discovery cycle. And that can be one part of the solution toward working on this problem of drug discovery for public health. So that's, the two projects that we've been working on.
Thank you very much, Alice, for introducing the wonderful project. And I guess, the ability to use AI to speed up the process will also change the way how we work, as like the medical doctor, or maybe the people who are engaged in this healthcare. And I think one of the main issues that Uday kind of raised is like how the future of work changed. And he is also one of the leading members of the GPA's Future of Work Institute, especially concerning about the Living Lab. So Uday, can you explain what your project is and how?
So I sort of missed saying a few things in the earlier part. So if you give me a minute, I'll just add. See, one of the fundamental things I wanted to emphasize, there's a lot of hype about AI. Okay, and we should, I'm perhaps one of the few technologists, maybe Alice also works on it, and I've been working on AI since the early days, since 90s, when artificial neural networks first made a foray into engineering disciplines. Fundamentally, what AI does is pattern recognition. Okay, it recognizes patterns in speech, it recognizes patterns in video, it recognizes patterns in images, it recognizes patterns in any kind of data you do. So AI is not all that powerful as it has been projected and as which the society is assuming that it's going to really solve all problems. No. And what we have been able to do is by doing pattern recognition, we are able to solve a large number of problems, okay, effectively. And yes, because of that, there is a lot of issues with privacy and various other things that many other people have kind of protected. And definitely we need these partnerships between academia, industry, and government. Okay, both of them. Academia and industry would be more involved in technology development in terms of, coming up, newer algorithms, maybe, better computers, better memory, so that, things will be faster and more reliable. Okay. On the other hand, government, in my opinion, will make policies. And of course, the academicians and the industry people will have to provide inputs so that the policies are good policies for society, and do not necessarily hurt society in any form or the other. Now, as far as the project is concerned, this is as Alice was talking about earlier. Okay, GPA is a big group, and I'm part of the group called Future of Work. And within that, there is a subgroup. There are several subgroups out there. I'm co-chairing that particular group on what they talk about is a living lab, AI living lab. This is a very amorphous thing. Currently, we are all kind of focusing on it and trying to see exactly evolving in some sense the definition of a living lab. If you look at a living lab broadly, there are various disciplines we talk about it. It's a co-creation ecosystem for human-centric research and innovation, which is a very high-level kind of definition of it. And what we are kind of starting on, it will be a virtual lab. And eventually we'll have a physical lab, but that may take some time and require a lot more resources to do some work of that nature. In the virtual lab, what we will do is we will set up things where people can interact with one another. Okay, in a sense, if there are communities, for example, I want to use AI for automobiles. How do I now identify these communities within my neighborhood? It doesn't have to be just a physical local neighborhood. My neighborhood essentially today is the whole world, but essentially like-minded people who are interested in AI, say for automobiles. This is one example. It could be AI for cancer research. It could be AI for vaccines or AI for drug discovery, as Alice was mentioning. How do we form these virtual communities where people can collaborate, people can interact? This is something that we would like to incorporate in our living lab. What we also want is that the living lab can be a vehicle for skills people want to develop. So initially we will have some few things related to AR, VR. In the preliminary part of it is augmented reality and virtual reality. And as we go along, we may add some more things. This is just part one of this particular platform that we are trying to work on. Okay, that's one particular thing. Obviously, we want to incorporate various resources that are there. For example, the work that both Rebecca talked about and the work that Amy talked about. We will approach them and see if we can link it up in a living lab. So it become a repository and a resource where people can look at what is happening. And we would really appreciate if they give us a permission to somehow link up the work that they are doing. I'll come to that a little later. In the final phase, what we want to do is to create this platform, what we call AI Living Lab, as a collaborative platform. So once the communities are formed, how do they collaborate with one another? I think Rebecca talked about collaborations, Amy talked about collaboration, Alice also mentioned it, but physical collaborations have the limitations in terms of various resources that are required. Can we create very active virtual collaborations? And one of the plus part of the pandemic is that most of us are now reasonably comfortable in the virtual medium. Earlier it was a bit of a kind of nobody wanted to have like video conferences and meetings based on that, but now we have gotten used to it. I'm not saying we should continue with it. In fact, the other session is kind of talking about some of the issues with that. But in some sense, a hybrid mode, and we can create this because, keep in mind, for us, say some people in India, to have a physical collaboration in the United States or in Europe or in Japan, it requires a fair amount of money to travel, to stay, and to take, and we may not have that. Maybe one person can participate. But if it is a virtual collaboration, and this is true for Africa, this will be true for Latin America, Central America, across the globe. If a virtual collaboration is there, many more of us can participate in it. And really, it can create a genuine global collaboration. So this is where I will stop. This is a broad definition. But one thing I would request is that if anybody has any ideas as to what the Living Lab should have, we are open to it because we are still evolving. So please forward us, any kind of email, any suggestions that you have, the panelists, as well as people who are listening to us in the audience.
Thank you, Dai. So I guess all of us actually have talked about this network and the interdisciplinary and the global network. And okay, so maybe before going to the last question, I just wanted to quickly ask all of you that so maybe Uday, you just mentioned like just contact me to join this network, but also like a partnership on AI or the GPI or the Amy's sustainable AI. I think they're all open to all the public. So what would you expect like each audiences today, or how can we contact or how can we contribute to your each project? So is there any way so that the people can get involved? So
I think Yeah. So this is a very, in some sense, a very difficult question because, asking the broad issues out here. I think they can contribute, by giving the suggestions, number one. Number two, each one can also kind of look at, we'll be happy to look at if they develop platforms which deal with AI in their locality, in their physical locale. And we can then try to patch into the living labs. See, one of the things we're looking at, and many are talking about, is you should have AI systems which are not completely autonomous. Somewhere you have human in the loop. Now, some things are there. If you look at autonomous vehicles today, at least in California, there is a law that you must have your hand on the steering wheel and you can't let the steering wheel, you can't let go of it in some sense. So partly the human is there in the loop to take care of any exigencies that might arise. So in some sense, we need to create, even in medicine, if you look at AI application, there is human in the loop. The final call will always be taken by the doctor. Okay. And not just the machine that will take the call. So in some sense, I think large number of AI systems, so people who are listening to us right now, if they can create some sort of a rough module like that and start work on it and share with us, we will be very happy to incorporate in it. Besides any thoughts and suggestions that they would have on what should a living lab be.
Thank you, Dai. So Alice, do you have any suggestion to the audiences? So who wanted to contribute to the project, or how can we reach, or maybe indirectly contribute to the project you're doing?
Sure. So I just wanted to mention simply that JPay has a website under OECD, I believe. If you just Google JPay, we have all the reports that the working groups have just published. They're brand new, like a couple weeks old. So if you read the reports, that will give you much more like deeper knowledge of what each working group is working on. I think that's a good way to begin.
Thank you very much. And Rebecca, partnership, I believe that there's a couple of companies in Japan also kind of being a membership of the partnership on AI.
Yes, that's correct. We are very thankful for our partners in Japan and throughout Asia, as well as around the world, many of whom are leading initiatives around the responsible deployment of AI across our work. And the nice thing about having an organization like PAI is seeing individuals who go in and out of roles in that regard to ensure that we're working together. But we are very interested in working with partner organizations and individuals who are keenly interested in the questions that we're currently focusing on. And even as we move forward, helping us to identify new areas of work. So in the first instance, I'm at Rebecca at partnershiponai.org. If anybody would like to reach out to me directly, we also have a website which has all of the information about the organization, as well as the current work streams that we are doing and that we're a part of, and really look forward to hearing from anyone who would like to work with us. And I do think it comes down to the question, the topic, and people's and individuals and organizations' time and capacity to contribute. And so having organizations like what we're hoping to do at the Partnership on AI, where we can help to sustain a community, so to actively be there to try to build a field together and a community of interest globally and action, that's very much core to what we hope to accomplish and what we'll be focusing on over the next couple of years.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Amy, you just launched this sustainable AI, and I assume, or I believe that there's a lots of things to do, and I think you need some hands,
Yes, we do.
How can we reach you?
Yeah, so we also have a website. It's sustainable-ai.eu. And you'll notice that the website is actually done with the value of sustainability in mind. So everything from the font to the color, everything is with how do we optimize sustainability. So for researchers who are interested in collaborating with us, we're looking for computer scientists, for people, in the technical space. We want to work, from the ethics side, we want to work with the technical or the technicians to understand how to track. What does that mean? What are the obstacles involved? So to try and build some more knowledge to bring this back to the ethics community, to create some reciprocity there. on a sort of larger scale, we are in conversation with some different companies right now on how we could look at tracking carbon emissions within the industry space. And so if there are companies out there who are interested in partnering with us to figure out what this looks like, how we can achieve it, please feel free to reach out. There's a contact button on the website. And for the ethicists who are interested in this, please, again, also feel free to reach out and to contact us. And I would say you also asked, what we can do. So it's one thing to reach out and to contact us and to create, an idea for a project. But I would say on sort of, the more individual level, I think if there are engineers who are out there listening to this or people who are in the space, I would say, now that it's a question on the table, if you're working in academia, in industry, are you doing anything to think about the environmental costs? Or is it just sort of, we're doing this really cool project. So just to plant the seed, is anything happening? Could you ask your project leader? Could you ask the professor that's leading your research group if you're doing anything, if you're interested, just to start, just to get some momentum and to get the conversation going.
Thank you, Amy. And that's a very wonderful messages to the audiences. So I think the topics of this whole Tokyo Forum is the science and the human mind. And I was, first of all, wondering what's the human mind and how can I link this kind of whole message to the human mind? But I guess like what Amy said in last message, that it's our own personal human mind, or the individual who wanted to who starts to think about the AI and society, and what Rebecca raised first, like what kind of society we would like to live in. That's I think the very basic question that we should start from. And the AI is right now a broader term, and we need to consider a lot of things. For example, like a climate change, or the pandemic issues, or maybe the human machine interaction, or the future work. So all those things can kind of based on like what kind of society we would like to live in. And I think from today's session, I think we learned that there's a lot of approach, and there's a lot of hands reached out to you all audiences. And I hope that today's session will be beneficial for all the audiences who have interest in these topics but don't know what to do or where to approach. So there's a lot of global and interdisciplinary network that are waiting for your hand and your support. So I hope the University of Tokyo is also based doing this kind of research and activities. And if you're interested in, we are also wanted to collaborate with like Amy's Sustainable AI, and also Rebecca's Partnership on AI, and also Alice and Uday's GPay. I'm also a member of the GPay. So please feel all the audiences who are interested in this topic. So because the time is limited, it's really, we don't have enough time to discuss all these projects and what's going on in the world. But I think the audiences has the new discoveries and issues that needed to be addressed. So because I think the time is now came, so I would like to end the session by thanking all the panelists for taking the stage. And thank you very much. And I hope to see you all maybe online or maybe in person. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Emma-san.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.
All right, thank you so much to all of our speakers and for the deep and insightful discussion. Now, after a short break, we'll bring you another round of parallel sessions 2A and 2B, so please stay with us.